The piano coda on Layla has generated millions in royalties since 1970. The woman who says she wrote it never saw a cent. And the man officially credited for it spent the last 40 years of his life in prison for something far worse than stolen music. Chapter 1. The Golden Boy. Before this man ever met Eric Clapton, he was already the most recorded drummer on the planet. Nobody remembers that part. By the time Jim Gordon was 17, he had turned down a UCLA scholarship to go on tour with the Everly Brothers. That was not a stupid decision. That was a correct read of the room. Within a few years, Gordon had become the protege of drum legend Hal Blaine, the Wrecking Crew legend whose drumming powered the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, and a core member of the Wrecking Crew himself, the anonymous session elite who played the actual instruments on half the hits of the 1960s, while the famous faces on the album covers smiled for cameras. More than 30 top 10 hits before he was 25. At the height of his studio run, Gordon was flying from Las Vegas to Los Angeles every single day, 2 or 3 sessions, back to Vegas in time for the evening show at Caesar's Palace, then doing it again the next morning. He was the best in the world, and everybody said so.
He's a big guy, and he's, to me, the best drummer in the world. The best. And he was the #1 studio drummer in this town for years. The #1 guy did, oh God, man, I can't even begin to name all the people he did. He did the Steely Dan Pretzel Logic album, Carly Simon, You're So Vain, on and on and on. Low Spark and High Heel Boys, Traffic, Clapton, Delaney and Bonnie. Best drummer in the world. The best. His drums, nobody's drums sounded better. Nobody grooved better than this guy. You've got to go out and get albums that he's playing on, and you'll have the biggest schooling you ever had in your life listening to this guy.
The voices in his head had already started talking. Then Eric Clapton called. Clapton wasn't looking for a session drummer. He was building something. A real band, his best band, the one he believed could match the intensity of what he was feeling. He needed the best drummer alive. He picked Jim Gordon. Clapton would later say that the rhythm section of Jim Gordon and Carl Radle was the most powerful rhythm section he ever played with. Gordon wasn't there to blend in. He was there because he was the best. Derek and the Dominos played their first show in 1970. Within months, they would record one of the most celebrated albums in rock history, and Jim Gordon would be at the center of all of it. Chapter 2. One of the most beloved songs in rock history has a co-writer who says the melody was stolen from her, and she has witnesses. In the summer of 1970, Gordon flew to Miami with Derek and the Dominos to record what would become Layla and other assorted love songs. The sessions were a pharmaceutical nightmare. Heroin and cocaine were available through the hotel newsstand. Allegedly, Clapton was so consumed by his obsession with George Harrison's wife that he had already consulted Dr. John for a voodoo package made of straw to help his chances. It was that kind of album. What came out of it was Layla and the haunting piano coda that closes the 7-minute song, one of the most recognized pieces of music in rock history. Jim Gordon is the official co-writer. He won a Grammy for it in 1993. Here's what the Grammy certificate doesn't mention. Rita Coolidge, Gordon's girlfriend at the time, says she wrote that melody. Earlier that year, she and Gordon had written a song called Time. Rita later said she played it for Clapton and left a demo cassette at his house. Then she heard that same melody on the radio, only now it was attached to Layla, and her name was nowhere on it. When Rita confronted Clapton's manager, Robert Stigwood, she says he told her, "You're a girl. You don't have the money to fight this. Let it go." Bobby Whitlock, who was close to the sessions, later called Gordon a co-thief. And there was one more detail that kept the story alive. Priscilla Coolidge, Rita's sister, recorded Time in 1973, the song Rita said the Layla piano melody came from, Clapton's version. He caught Gordon secretly recording piano love songs during a studio break and simply asked to use one. He has never mentioned Coolidge. The melody is still credited to Jim Gordon. The Grammy still belongs to Jim Gordon. The royalties still flow into a trust for his daughter. Rita Coolidge never saw a cent.
I left a demo on the piano and hoped that he would maybe consider it after we left, and nothing happened. And a year later, I was in the studio having photographs done, all in releasing my first album, and I hear the music come over the PA at AM. And I knew that it was my music, and I just didn't know where it was coming from. And then I figured it out, as they said, that was Eric Clapton, Derek and the Dominos, and Layla. So I went to the record store to see if I had any credit on it, and sure enough, I didn't.
Chapter 3. What happened in that hotel hallway should have ended his career. Instead, the industry gave him a pass. 3 months before the Layla sessions, Gordon was on the road with Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour. He was known the way he'd always been known. Gentle, all-American, the good one. Claudia Lanier said his smile felt like a mask. Mark Lindsay said he sensed something lurking behind the curtain. One night, Gordon lured Rita Coolidge into a hotel hallway and punched her hard enough to knock her unconscious. Then he walked back into the room and kept socializing as if nothing had happened. That is not a rock star having a bad night on drugs. That is a man capable of sudden, targeted, affectless violence, the kind that has a clinical name. His peers saw it. His peers said nothing. The industry consensus was bad vibes, too much coke, you know how it is. And they kept booking him because he was still the best drummer alive. And that was a more manageable fact than the alternative. Chapter 4. In 1973, he sat behind the kit for the Incredible Bongo Band's Apache, a session that should have been just another day's work for one of the busiest drummers in Los Angeles. It wasn't. The break he played became the most sampled drum passage in hip-hop history. For years, DJs in the Bronx were building on Jim Gordon's wrists. But while that beat was taking on a second life, Gordon's own life was starting to fall apart. Something was getting worse. Fast. That same year, Gordon attacked his girlfriend, singer-songwriter Renee Armand, beating her so badly she suffered broken ribs and needed medical treatment. It was one of several violent episodes that marked the start of a long, tragic descent.
I remember coming home, and I came up the stairs of our house, and he was in the hallway when I walked in, and he said to me, "I know what you've done." He was talking to me. He wasn't talking to me. He held out these things in the palm of his hand, and there were 3. He had like a scrap of paper and a pin and a string, and he said, "I know what you've done. You've created the devil's triangle. I found them." I didn't want to die. Didn't want to die like that, at least. I only got away because he stopped long enough to go to the kitchen and get a drink, and I crawled out and hid. I pretty much never saw him again.
And this is the part that makes the whole story hard to wrap your head around. While all of that was happening, he was still playing with Carly Simon, George Harrison, Frank Zappa. He was everywhere. But by the mid-1970s, Gordon was hearing a voice he believed was his mother's. Cynical, harsh, constant. It told him when he could eat, when he could sleep. It caused headaches so bad they left him wrecked. Doctors blamed alcohol, a mood disorder, stress. Schizophrenia was never mentioned. The drums were the only place the voices went quiet, so Gordon started self-medicating with cocaine. And in a grim, twisted way, it was actually working. His psychiatrist would later note that cocaine can normalize dopamine levels. For someone with untreated schizophrenia, it can act like a crude antipsychotic. He wasn't getting high for fun. He was trying to feel normal, trying to feel human. And the advice he got was almost unbelievable. Drink less. The cocaine, apparently, was fine. Nobody figured out what was really happening for another decade. By then, Jim Gordon had already done what the voice told him to do. Chapter 5. North Hollywood, June 3rd, 1983. Every psychiatrist who saw Jim Gordon in the 1970s sent him home. What happened next is on all of them. By the early 1980s, the session calls had stopped. Too unreliable. Too unpredictable. The industry that had looked the other way for 13 years had finally just moved on. Gordon was playing for $30 a night in dive bars. On June 3rd, 1983, a voice told him what he needed to do. He drove to his mother Osa's home in North Hollywood. She was 71 years old. He killed her with a hammer and a butcher knife.
Very, very far down some emotional alleyway at that point. And when the thought started to occur to him through voices in his head that he could kill his mother, it had never occurred to him before. Suicide had. There had been several suicide attempts, but that was a new thought. Now, he was concerned that his mother would feel the pain, so he got a hammer. He thought if he hit her with the hammer, he would knock her unconscious, and then he could stab her and she wouldn't feel it. It was a brutal, brutal attack, and he smashed her with the hammer a number of times, and then he stabbed her a number of times right through the aorta. She was killed instantly, and the last stab wound stuck in the floor.
I don't know what it says about this story that the worst thing I can tell you isn't the drugs, or the stolen melody, or the years of violence nobody stopped. It's that somewhere in that house in North Hollywood, a 71-year-old woman opened her door, and it was her son. He was arrested the same day, and only then, only after he had murdered someone, did a psychiatrist finally get it right. Schizophrenia, not alcohol, not a mood disorder. Schizophrenia. The condition he had been living with, undiagnosed, for over a decade, while playing on Grammy-winning records, while being waved through psychiatric facilities, while being told by the people who were supposed to help him to lay off the booze. California's Proposition 8 had just gutted the insanity defense. The threshold for legal incompetence was now so high that even a man obeying command hallucinations for 10 years couldn't clear it. Gordon was sentenced to 16 years to life for second-degree murder. He had played on sessions alongside Hal Blaine. He had co-written Layla. He had built the break that launched an entire genre. And he was going to prison because the system that was supposed to catch him had spent a decade telling him to drink less beer. Chapter 6. While Jim Gordon was sitting in a prison cell, the song he may have stolen was making other people rich. And then it won a Grammy. At the California Men's Colony in the mid-1990s, Jim Gordon joined a prison band called Sounds Incarcerated. He played on a plastic milk crate. Inmates stood around watching him, this medicated shell in a prison jumpsuit, hands still impossibly precise. They had heard he was somebody. They watched his hands and understood that was true. In 1993, while still serving his sentence, Gordon won a Grammy Award, the unplugged version of Layla. He was in a cell when it happened. His royalties went into a trust for his daughter, Amy. Nobody from the industry commented. His name was not in the newspapers. Eric Clapton accepted the award. No word on whether he thanked Rita Coolidge. Chapter 7. Jim Gordon died on March 13, 2023, at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, 77 years old, nearly 4 decades behind bars. His death did something his life hadn't been able to do for 40 years. It made people look directly at the whole story, not a murderer who happened to play drums. A musician, a generational one, arguably the greatest rock drummer who ever lived, consumed by a disease that his industry, his doctors, and his legal system failed to identify until it was catastrophic and irreversible. Joel Selvin, who wrote his biography, said it plainly. Jim Gordon had to die to be forgiven. The voice he heard for all those years, the one that dictated his meals, stole his sleep, and ultimately told him to do the unforgivable, was his mother's. This was not some forgotten sideman drifting at the edge of the industry. This was one of the greatest drummers alive at the time, and the people around him watched him disappear in real time. Nobody wanted to say that out loud. Nobody wanted to shut the machine down. Nobody wanted to lose the best drummer in the room. So they protected the talent and abandoned the man. That's the story. It's not just Jim Gordon. We see it every day. People will overlook a lot when someone is still useful to them. And that's what makes it feel rotten. Because even after the blood, the trial, the years, the silence, the music never stopped. The songs kept playing. The piano coda still floated out of car speakers. The radio never flinched. Like none of it ever happened.